It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. Jackson Reed, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer from Colorado, had dreamed for years of venturing deep into the Amazon rainforest. With his loyal German shepherd, Dakota, always by his side, the plan was to capture rare, untouched images of wildlife and explore areas where few outsiders had ever dared to go. After securing a special permit and arranging for a local guide, Jackson and Dakota set off by riverboat into the dense, emerald heart of Brazil's Amazon basin. The sun blazed overhead, and the canopy of trees cast flickering shadows on the water as the boat carved through winding tributaries. Jackson's camera clicked steadily while Dakota stood alert at the front, ears perked and eyes scanning the trees. The bond between them was unbreakable. Jackson had rescued Dakota as a pup during a winter storm 5 years ago, and since then, they had become inseparable, partners in every journey, every expedition, every silent moment of discovery. Their guide, a seasoned local named Miguel, spoke in clipped English but was well-versed in the land. "We go for more hours upriver. Then walk. Small village. From there, deeper jungle," he had explained. Jackson trusted him. Miguel knew the terrain, the weather patterns, and the dangers: poisonous plants, hidden predators, sudden floods. But even with Miguel's experience, no one could fully predict what the Amazon would throw at them. It was a world governed by its own wild rules. After reaching the village, the group set out on foot. Lush greenery enveloped them from all sides, and the sounds of birds, insects, and distant howls created a symphony of life both mesmerizing and unsettling. Jackson took pictures of brilliantly colored frogs and birds with iridescent feathers. Dakota moved confidently beside him, navigating muddy trails and sniffing the air with a calm but constant awareness. Then, on the third day, the unexpected happened. The group was setting up camp when a violent storm rolled in faster than anyone anticipated. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning solid ground into ankle-deep mud. Thunder boomed overhead, and lightning flashed through the towering trees. Miguel shouted in Portuguese, urging Jackson to pack quickly, but in the chaos, Dakota barked and bolted into the underbrush. Something had startled him. Jackson didn't think twice. "Dakota," he shouted, sprinting after his dog, heart pounding with fear. Behind him, Miguel yelled, but his voice was drowned out by the storm. Branches whipped at Jackson's face as he chased the fleeting blur of his companion's tail. The forest swallowed them both. After several minutes of frantic running, Jackson finally found Dakota near a thicket, growling low at something unseen in the darkness. But when Jackson turned around, the camp was gone, no lights, no voices, just a wall of green and the roar of the rain. They were lost. Hours passed as Jackson tried retracing his steps, calling for Miguel, checking his GPS, but the storm had fried his equipment. The device blinked uselessly. With no signal and darkness falling fast, Jackson knew they had no choice but to shelter in place for the night. He rigged a makeshift talk between two trees using his emergency kit and curled up with Dakota close beside him, trying to stay dry and calm. Dakota's steady breathing and watchful presence kept Jackson grounded, but deep down, he knew the gravity of the situation. The Amazon was vast, unforgiving, and easy to get lost in, especially without food, direction, or communication. Morning brought no relief. Mist clung to the undergrowth, and the damp forest floor steamed as the sun rose. Jackson tried again to find a familiar trail, but the landmarks were deceptive. Everything looked the same. He conserved the little food he had in his backpack and gave Dakota half of his protein bar. "We'll get out of this," he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. The rainforest around them teemed with life, but it also held silent threats: snakes hidden beneath leaves, jaguars tracking silently, insects that could transmit diseases with a single bite. Every sound made Jackson pause. Dakota stayed close, ever vigilant. Once, they came upon a small stream and drank gratefully, splashing cool water on their faces. Jackson looked at his reflection, weary and mud-splattered, and couldn't help but think how quickly everything had changed. By the third day, hunger gnawed at his stomach and blisters tore at his feet. But Jackson refused to give up. "As long as we're together, we're not done," he told Dakota, who wagged his tail as if understanding. They pressed on, following the sun's direction during the day and sheltering in dense thickets at night. Jackson's body ached, but his instincts sharpened. Every movement became deliberate, every decision a matter of survival. Dakota, too, became more than a pet. He was a partner, a protector, a reason to keep pushing forward. But as they reached a steep ravine and peered into the thick fog beyond, Jackson realized the worst might still be ahead. They were alive, but lost in a world that didn't care if they made it out. The jungle did not slow down. If anything, it grew louder and wilder the deeper Jackson and Dakota went. The air was heavy, thick with moisture and insects that seemed determined to test every inch of exposed skin. Jackson's clothes were soaked and clinging to his body, not from rain anymore, but from sweat. The heat was relentless, pressing in from all directions like a living, breathing entity. Dakota's panting grew heavier with each step, but his alertness never faltered. Jackson was rationing every ounce of energy, taking breaks only when absolutely necessary, often under wide-leafed palms or beside gnarled tree roots that offered a moment's rest from the brutal sun. By now, Jackson had lost track of how many days they had been wandering. Time in the jungle bent and blurred. The days bled into each other, marked only by sunrise and the growing ache in his muscles. His camera equipment was destroyed, soaked beyond repair, but he no longer cared. The goal had shifted completely. This was no longer about wildlife photography or adventure. This was about survival. He'd already eaten his last protein bar the morning before, giving Dakota the final scrap, and now his stomach twisted painfully with hunger. The forest offered food, but not without risk. Jackson had read enough to know that one wrong berry or contaminated water source could end it all. But necessity pushed him forward. On the fourth morning, they stumbled upon a wild banana plant. The fruit was small and barely ripe, but Jackson took the chance. He plucked a few and tested them, offering a bite to Dakota before cautiously eating his share. They were bitter but edible, and they gave him just enough strength to keep going. That afternoon, they discovered a deeper stream, wider and clearer than the one before. Jackson dropped to his knees and drank deeply, refilling his flask and splashing water on Dakota's face. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were moving in the right direction. But the jungle had its own plans. That night, while resting in a grove of saber trees, Dakota suddenly growled low and stood, hackles raised. Jackson froze. A rustling came from the undergrowth, slow, deliberate, heavy. His heart pounded as he scanned the shadows, his fingers tightening around the small pocket knife in his bag. Then he saw them, glinting eyes, low to the ground, and a slinking shape circling the perimeter of their camp. A jaguar. Beautiful. Silent. Deadly. Jackson didn't move, barely breathed. Dakota stood between him and the predator, tail stiff, body trembling with tension. For a moment, man and beast stared at one another through the thick curtain of vines. Then the jaguar blinked, turned, and disappeared into the darkness without a sound. Jackson exhaled slowly, his body still frozen from fear. He pulled Dakota close. "Good boy, you saved us," he whispered, voice cracking. Sleep was impossible after that. Every sound felt like a threat. But by dawn, they were on the move again. Jackson had begun to notice subtle changes in the terrain. The ground was firmer. The plants were different. And sometimes, just barely, he could swear he heard something man-made in the far-off distance. Maybe a distant engine. Or voices. Or was his mind playing tricks on him? He didn't know anymore. His beard had grown thick, his face scratched from branches and insect bites. But his eyes remained sharp, locked on the trail ahead. He had to keep going. Dakota depended on him as much as he depended on Dakota. On the fifth day, the forest suddenly opened up into a flooded clearing, and there, tangled in vines and moss, was something unmistakable, a collapsed wooden bridge. It looked old, weather-beaten, and half-swallowed by the jungle. But it meant something important. People had once been here. Civilization wasn't as far away as he'd feared. Jackson's heart leapt. He scanned the surroundings, hoping for more signs, and then he saw it, an empty water bottle, partially buried in the mud, with a faded label written in Portuguese. It was old, sun-bleached, but it confirmed one thing: others had passed through this area. He wasn't completely alone. That night, Jackson built a stronger shelter, using vines and large leaves, and lit a small fire using dry twigs and his emergency flint. The flame sputtered, small and orange, but it was the first real warmth he'd felt in days. Dakota curled beside him, his head resting on Jackson's leg. Together they stared at the fire in silence. There were no more words left to say. Just survival. Just instinct. Just the quiet resolve to keep moving forward. But just as Jackson was drifting into sleep, Dakota lifted his head suddenly. His ears twitched. Jackson sat up. "What is it?" he whispered. Then he heard it too, a distant sound echoing through the trees. It was faint, but unmistakable. A mechanical hum. Could it be a plane? A boat? A search party? Jackson stood, his heart racing. For the first time since they had been lost, he felt something surge in his chest that had almost disappeared completely: hope. Jackson didn't sleep that night. The distant sound he and Dakota had heard, a low, pulsing drone, stayed with him, echoing inside his head like a heartbeat. He kept rising every hour, moving a few paces from the shelter, straining his ears through the thick curtain of trees. At times he wondered if he had imagined it, some trick of the jungle playing with his desperation. But Dakota wasn't easily fooled. Each time the faint sound stirred again, the dog's ears perked, his body stiffening like a radar. Jackson clung to that, believing that Dakota, even more than him, would know when something real was near. As dawn broke over the forest, the first golden light filtering through leaves glistening with dew, Jackson packed what little remained of their supplies. His legs were weak, his frame thin from hunger and exhaustion, but adrenaline kept him moving. They would follow the sound. He headed northeast, guided only by instinct and Dakota's nose. For hours they wove through thick vines, muddy banks, and sudden drops. Jackson had started marking trees with small scratches using a rock, worried that if they didn't find help, they might at least leave a trail behind. But by midday, the air had changed. The jungle thinned slightly, and the scent was different. Less of decay, more of smoke and machine oil. And then he heard it again. This time louder. A real engine. No mistaking it. Jackson froze and looked at Dakota. "We're close," he whispered, voice hoarse. So close. They pushed ahead, stumbling through a patch of dense ferns before emerging onto a narrow, muddy trail, clearly human-made. Tire tracks were faint but there. A shiver ran through Jackson. This wasn't a figment of hope. This was real. Still cautious, he followed the path, keeping close to the trees. Dakota moved ahead with sharp focus, nose low, tail high. Around a bend in the trail, the hum grew clearer, and then Jackson saw it. A weather-beaten outpost with a tin roof and a short communications tower rose above the foliage. Parked nearby was an old, dust-covered jeep. Two men in fatigues were unloading gear beside it. Jackson stumbled forward, waving both arms. "Hey! Hey!" he croaked, nearly collapsing. One of the men turned and dropped his bag in shock. "Meu Deus!" the man cried, rushing toward him. Within moments, they were surrounding him, speaking in rapid Portuguese, supporting his arms, offering water. Jackson nearly wept as he explained in broken phrases what had happened: lost during a storm, separated from his guide, surviving off the jungle for days with his dog. Dakota barked softly, staying at Jackson's side as if to confirm every word. The men radioed in a report, and soon, more help arrived. Jackson and Dakota were placed in the back of a jeep and driven through a long dirt road, bumping over roots and stones as the jungle slowly gave way to open terrain. When they reached a nearby village medical station, Jackson was too weak to stand. The local nurse placed him on a cot, checking his vitals, cleaning his cuts, and offering food that tasted like heaven even though it was just rice and beans. He offered half of it to Dakota, who ate eagerly, tail wagging. Later that evening, they cleaned Dakota's paws, treated a small infected cut on his leg, and wrapped him in a clean blanket. Jackson watched through blurred eyes, a lump in his throat. His companion, his savior, was alive and safe. Word spread quickly, and within 24 hours, a Brazilian rescue team connected Jackson to the U.S. Embassy. His voice trembled as he called his sister back in Colorado. "It's me. I'm okay," he whispered. She sobbed uncontrollably on the other end. Over the next few days, Jackson and Dakota recovered in the village, growing stronger with each meal and hour of sleep. The villagers, amazed by the story, treated them with kindness and admiration. Jackson was offered fresh clothes, medical supplies, and even a proper bath. But it wasn't until a local elder approached him one morning, placing a hand on his shoulder, that the emotional weight fully settled. "You came from the forest," the man said slowly in English, "but you did not come out alone. That dog. He carried your soul." Jackson's eyes welled up. He looked at Dakota, lying in the shade, tongue out, eyes bright. "He saved me," Jackson replied. Over and over again. Before flying back to the States, Jackson gave a full report to the authorities, and efforts were made to locate Miguel, the guide. It turned out Miguel had survived and was found a few days later downstream, disoriented but alive. They were reunited briefly, both men embracing with quiet gratitude, each scarred but breathing. The jungle had tested them, but had not taken them. On the flight home, Jackson looked out the window as the green canopy of the Amazon disappeared beneath the clouds. He reached over and scratched behind Dakota's ears. "We made it, buddy," he said. "You and me. We made it." Back home in Colorado, Jackson's story made headlines. Man and dog survived the Amazon was splashed across TV screens and news articles. But fame didn't matter to Jackson. What mattered was the journey and the bond. He and Dakota had faced the wild together and come out stronger. And every time Jackson looked into his dog's amber eyes, he remembered the days in the jungle, the hunger, the fear, the firelight, and the silent promise they had made to one another, never give up.